My brother-in-law tried to move into my inherited house without my permission, claiming family rights and using pressure from relatives. When he arrived with a moving truck, I called the police and set legal boundaries. I own a small lakeside cabin that I inherited from my grandfather 3 years ago. The property sits on 2 acres with direct water access and has been in my family for over 40 years. My husband Jacob, 32 male and I 29 female, use it as our weekend retreat, and it's become our sanctuary away from city life. Jacob has a younger brother named Finn, a 26 male who has always been the family's problem child. Finn dropped out of college twice, can't hold down a job for more than 6 months, and has a habit of making poor financial decisions. Despite this, Jacob's parents, Carol, 58 female, and Dennis, 61 male, continue to enable him by giving him money whenever he asks and making excuses for his behavior. 6 months ago, Finn started dating Amber, a 24-year-old single mother with a 3-year-old daughter named Lily. Amber works part-time at a grocery store and receives some child support from her ex-boyfriend, but money is always tight for them. They've been living in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment in a rough part of town, and Amber has been vocal about wanting to find somewhere better for her daughter. The problem started 2 months ago, when Finn began making comments during family gatherings about how lucky Jacob and I were to have such a beautiful cabin sitting empty most of the week. He would joke about how much space we had and how it was almost wasteful not to use it more often. At first, I brushed off these comments as harmless observations, but they became more frequent and pointed. 3 weeks ago, during Sunday dinner at Carol and Dennis's house, Finn brought up the cabin again. He mentioned how Amber was worried about Lily starting preschool in their current neighborhood and how the schools near the lake were so much better. Carol immediately jumped in, agreeing that it would be wonderful for Lily to grow up in such a peaceful environment. Dennis nodded along, adding that the fresh air would be good for all of them. I noticed Jacob shifting uncomfortably in his seat, but he didn't say anything. After dinner, when we were driving home, I asked him if his family was hinting at something specific. He shrugged and said his brother was probably just daydreaming about living somewhere nicer, but I could tell something was bothering him. The situation escalated last weekend when Finn and Amber showed up at our apartment unannounced on Saturday morning. They claimed they were in the neighborhood and wanted to visit, but within minutes of arriving, Amber started gushing about how she'd heard so much about the cabin and would love to see pictures. I showed them some photos on my phone, and Amber's eyes lit up as she scrolled through images of the spacious living room, the loft bedroom, and the deck overlooking the water. Finn casually mentioned that they had been thinking about taking a weekend trip to the lake area and asked if we ever rented the cabin out to family. I told them we didn't rent it to anyone because it was our personal retreat and we liked knowing it was secure and well-maintained. Amber's face fell slightly, but she quickly recovered and started asking detailed questions about the local schools, grocery stores, and job opportunities in the area. After they left, Jacob was quiet for the rest of the day. That evening, he finally told me that Finn had been calling him repeatedly during the week, asking about the possibility of staying at the cabin temporarily while they looked for a better place to live. Jacob said he had been avoiding the conversations because he knew I wouldn't be comfortable with the arrangement, but the pressure from his family was increasing. I reminded Jacob that the cabin was my inheritance and represented my connection to my grandfather, who had spent decades building and improving the property. I explained that having long-term house guests, especially ones with a young child, would fundamentally change the peaceful atmosphere we had cultivated there. Jacob agreed and promised to have a firm conversation with his brother about boundaries. However, Jacob's conversation with Finn didn't go as planned. Instead of accepting the boundary, Finn became defensive and accused Jacob of being selfish and uncaring toward family members in need. He argued that we had more than enough space and resources to help them out temporarily, and that refusing to do so showed we didn't truly care about family bonds. Finn then involved his parents, telling them that Jacob had rejected his reasonable request for temporary housing assistance. Carol called Jacob the next day, expressing disappointment that we weren't willing to help Finn and Amber during their difficult time. She pointed out that families should support each other and that we were blessed to have such a beautiful property that could benefit everyone. Dennis joined the conversation, adding that he couldn't understand why we would need such a large cabin all to ourselves when Finn and Amber could really use the help. He suggested that we could easily coexist on the property with them using the main cabin while we stayed in the small guest room when we visited. The pressure intensified when Carol organized a family meeting at their house to discuss what she called the housing situation. She had prepared a detailed presentation about the benefits of the arrangement, including how Finn could help with property maintenance in exchange for free housing, and how having people living there full-time would provide better security for the cabin. Amber attended this meeting and brought printed information about the local elementary school, highlighting its excellent ratings compared to schools in their current area. She spoke passionately about wanting to provide better opportunities for her daughter and how grateful they would be for any help we could provide. Lily was there too, playing quietly with toys Carol had set out for her. Finn presented his case by emphasizing his commitment to taking care of the property and his newfound motivation to find stable employment in the lake area. He claimed that living there would give him the peace and inspiration he needed to turn his life around and become more responsible. Throughout the meeting, I felt like I was being cornered by a coordinated campaign designed to make me look heartless for refusing their request. Every point they raised seemed calculated to highlight their needs while minimizing the impact on Jacob and me. They spoke as if the decision had already been made and they were just working out the logistics. When I finally spoke up to explain why the arrangement wouldn't work, Carol interrupted me to say that she understood my concerns but that family obligations sometimes required personal sacrifices. Dennis added that my grandfather would have wanted the cabin to be used to help family members in need, which struck me as particularly manipulative since he had never met my grandfather. Jacob remained mostly silent during the meeting, occasionally nodding when his parents made points but not offering strong support for either side. His neutrality felt like a betrayal, especially when I needed him to stand up for our decision and our relationship boundaries. The meeting ended with Carol suggesting that we take some time to think about their proposal and discuss it privately before making a final decision. Finn and Amber thanked everyone for being so understanding and supportive while I sat there feeling like I had been ambushed and manipulated. On the drive home, Jacob and I had our biggest argument in years. I accused him of failing to support me when his family was pressuring us to give up our personal space and sanctuary. He defended himself by saying he was trying to keep the peace and find a solution that might work for everyone, but I pointed out that there was no compromise that would preserve what the cabin meant to us. Jacob argued that maybe we were being too rigid, and that helping his brother might actually strengthen family relationships in the long run. He suggested that we could set a time limit on the arrangement and establish clear rules about property care and respect for our privacy during visits. I reminded him that Finn had never shown the ability to follow rules or respect boundaries in any other area of his life, and that once they were established in the cabin, removing them would become much more complicated. I also pointed out that Amber's daughter would likely start school there, making any temporary arrangement effectively permanent. The conversation revealed that Jacob had been feeling guilty about his financial stability compared to his brother's struggles, and he worried that refusing to help would create permanent damage in his family relationships. He admitted that his parents had been calling him daily to discuss the situation and express their disappointment in his lack of family loyalty. I explained that my boundary wasn't about lacking compassion for their situation, but about protecting something that held deep personal significance and served as our refuge from everyday stresses. I told him that allowing Finn and Amber to move in would fundamentally change the cabin's role in our lives and potentially create ongoing conflicts that could damage our marriage. The argument continued late into the night with neither of us willing to budge from our positions. Jacob eventually said he needed more time to think about everything, and we went to bed without resolving anything. Since then, the tension between us has been thick, and I know his family continues to call him regularly to discuss their proposal. Yesterday, Carol texted me directly for the first time asking if we could meet for coffee to discuss the situation woman to woman. Her message emphasized how much Amber was counting on this opportunity and how disappointed little Lily would be if they couldn't move to the lake area after getting her hopes up. I haven't responded to Carol's text yet because I'm not sure how to handle this situation without creating permanent damage to Jacob's family relationships. At the same time, I refuse to be manipulated into giving up something that means so much to me just because they've decided to make it a family issue. The worst part is that I can see this conflict affecting Jacob's relationship with me. He's been distant and seems to be questioning whether I'm being unreasonable by refusing to help his family. I worry that if I don't find a way to resolve this situation soon, it could seriously damage our marriage. Update 1. The situation has gotten much worse since my original post. I decided not to meet with Carol for coffee because I knew it would just be another attempt to pressure me into agreeing to their demands. Instead, I suggested that Jacob handle all communications with his family about the cabin situation, since it was creating tension between us. Jacob agreed to this arrangement and called his parents to explain that we had made our final decision and wouldn't be allowing Finn and Amber to move into the cabin. I thought this would end the discussion, but I was completely wrong about how his family would react. 2 days after Jacob's call, Finn showed up at our apartment building and waited in the lobby until I came home from work. He cornered me by the mailboxes and started what he called a heart-to-heart conversation about the situation. He told me that Amber had been crying every night since learning about our decision and that Lily kept asking when they would be moving to the pretty house by the water. Finn accused me of being selfish and cruel for prioritizing my own comfort over a child's well-being. He said that my grandfather would be ashamed of how I was using his property to exclude family members who needed help. When I tried to end the conversation and go upstairs, he blocked my path and continued talking. He revealed that they had already given notice to their current landlord and had been telling Lily about the move for weeks. According to Finn, they had been so confident that we would eventually agree to help them that they had started making concrete plans based on the assumption that they would be living at the cabin by the end of the month. I told Finn that their poor planning wasn't my responsibility and that they should have waited for our explicit agreement before making any commitments. He responded by saying that family members shouldn't need explicit permission to help each other and that our rejection of their request showed we didn't consider them real family. The conversation escalated when Finn started questioning why Jacob had married someone who obviously didn't care about his family's well-being. He suggested that I was controlling Jacob and preventing him from being generous and supportive toward his own brother. When I finally managed to get past him and head toward the elevator, he called after me that I would regret being so heartless. That evening, Jacob received angry calls from both of his parents, expressing their shock and disappointment that Finn had been forced to approach me directly. Carol accused Jacob of hiding behind me instead of taking responsibility for the decision himself. Dennis said he was embarrassed that his son would allow his wife to treat family members so poorly. The calls upset Jacob more than I had seen him in years. He spent most of that night pacing around our apartment and questioning whether we were making the right choice. He pointed out that his family had never asked us for anything major before, and that refusing this request might permanently damage his relationships with all of them. I reminded Jacob that we weren't responsible for Finn and Amber's housing problems, and that giving into emotional manipulation would only encourage more demands in the future. I also pointed out that Finn's confrontation with me in the lobby showed exactly the kind of boundary violations we could expect if they moved into the cabin. Jacob acknowledged that his brother's behavior had been inappropriate, but he said he understood the desperation that had motivated it. He suggested that maybe we could offer some kind of compromise, like letting them stay at the cabin for a few weeks while they found another place to live. I refused to consider any compromise because I knew that temporary arrangements with people like Finn never stayed temporary. I told Jacob that if he wanted to help his brother financially, he could offer to pay for a security deposit on a different apartment, but that our cabin was completely off limits. This led to another major argument where Jacob accused me of being inflexible and unsympathetic to his family's needs. I responded by pointing out that his family had never shown any respect for our boundaries or our relationship, and that this situation was just the latest example of their entitlement. The argument was interrupted by a phone call from Amber herself. She was crying and begging to speak with me directly about the situation. Against my better judgment, I agreed to talk to her while Jacob listened on speakerphone. Amber's call was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She started by apologizing for any misunderstandings and emphasizing how grateful she was for everything Jacob and I had done for Finn over the years. Then she shifted into describing Lily's excitement about moving to the lake and how difficult it had been to explain that they wouldn't be able to live in the pretty house after all. She talked about her fears for Lily's safety in their current neighborhood and her dreams of providing a better life for her daughter. She mentioned specific incidents of crime near their apartment and described how Lily had been having nightmares since seeing some teenagers fighting in their parking lot. Amber then revealed something that caught both Jacob and me completely off guard. She said that Finn had proposed to her the previous week and that they were planning to get married as soon as they could afford a proper wedding. She suggested that this changed the nature of their request because Finn would soon be Jacob's official brother-in-law, making me practically family to both her and Lily. The engagement news explained why the pressure from Jacob's family had intensified so dramatically. They weren't just advocating for Finn anymore. They were trying to welcome Amber and Lily into the family by securing them better housing. Carol and Dennis probably saw this as their chance to help their future daughter-in-law and step-granddaughter. Amber continued by offering to sign any kind of rental agreement or contract we wanted, emphasizing that they weren't looking for a handout, but rather a chance to build a stable life together. She promised that Finn had changed since meeting her and Lily, and that living at the cabin would give him the motivation he needed to find steady work and become a responsible family man. By the end of the call, Jacob was visibly moved by Amber's emotional appeal. He looked at me with pleading eyes, clearly hoping that the engagement news and Amber's promises would change my mind about the situation. I could see that he was genuinely torn between supporting me and helping his brother start his new family. However, I remained unmoved by Amber's performance because I had heard Finn make similar promises about changing his life many times before. I told her that I sympathized with her situation, but that our decision was final and wouldn't be changing regardless of any new developments in their relationship. Amber's demeanor shifted immediately after my rejection. She started crying harder and accused me of destroying their family's future happiness out of spite. She said that Lily would grow up remembering that her step-aunt had refused to help them when they needed it most, and that this would create lasting resentment within the family. The call ended with Amber hanging up on us, but within minutes, Carol was calling Jacob back to express her outrage at how rudely I had treated their future daughter-in-law. She said that Amber had called her immediately after our conversation, sobbing about my coldness and lack of empathy. Carol demanded that Jacob make me apologize to Amber and reconsider our position on the cabin. She said that refusing to help Finn and his new family would be seen as a rejection of Amber and Lily, which could poison family relationships for years to come. That night, Jacob told me that he couldn't continue defending our decision to his family because he was starting to question it himself. He said that maybe we were being too protective of the cabin and that helping Finn might actually be the right thing to do. He suggested that we could try the arrangement for a few months and see how it worked out. I realized then that Jacob's family had successfully worn him down with their sustained pressure campaign. He was no longer thinking clearly about the situation because he was so desperate to restore peace within his family. I told him that if he was willing to sacrifice our sanctuary and our relationship boundaries just to make his family happy, then we had bigger problems than I had realized. Update 2. Everything came to a head 2 weeks ago, in the most dramatic way possible. Jacob and I had been barely speaking since my last update because he continued pressuring me to reconsider while I remained firm in my refusal. The tension was affecting every aspect of our relationship, and I was starting to wonder if our marriage could survive this conflict. I decided to go to the cabin alone for a long weekend to clear my head and figure out what I wanted to do about the situation. Jacob said he understood why I needed space and promised not to bother me with any more discussions about his family while I was there. Friday afternoon, I drove up to the cabin and immediately felt some of the stress leave my body as I pulled into the familiar driveway. The fall colors were beautiful that weekend, and I spent Friday evening sitting on the deck with a glass of wine, watching the sunset over the water. Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of vehicles in my driveway. When I looked out the window, I saw Finn's truck followed by a large moving van. My heart started racing as I realized what was happening, but I couldn't quite believe they would actually try to move in without permission. I rushed outside and found Finn directing 2 movers who were unloading boxes and furniture from the van. Amber was there with Lily, and they had brought what looked like all of their belongings. When Finn saw me, he had the nerve to smile and wave as if this was a planned event. I marched over to him and demanded to know what he thought he was doing. He calmly explained that they had decided to move forward with their plans because they couldn't wait any longer for me to come around to the idea. He said that once I saw how well they could take care of the property and how happy Lily was there, I would realize that this arrangement was meant to be. Amber joined the conversation and tried to act like nothing unusual was happening. She thanked me for being so understanding and said they would do everything possible to respect my space when I visited. She pointed out how excited Lily was to finally see her new home and suggested that we could all work together to make the transition smooth. I told them both that they were trespassing on my property and needed to leave immediately. Finn laughed and said that Jacob had given them permission to move in and that my objections were irrelevant since I wasn't the only owner of the cabin. This was completely false, as the cabin was entirely my inheritance and Jacob had no legal claim to it whatsoever. When I told Finn that he was lying about Jacob's permission, he pulled out his phone and claimed to have text messages, proving that Jacob had agreed to the arrangement. He showed me screenshots of conversations, but I could see immediately that they had been taken out of context and misrepresented Jacob's actual words. The messages showed Jacob expressing sympathy for their situation and frustration with the ongoing family conflict, but nothing that could reasonably be interpreted as permission for them to move into the cabin. Finn had apparently twisted Jacob's emotional responses into an invitation and used that as justification for their invasion of my property. I called Jacob immediately and put him on speakerphone so everyone could hear his response. When he answered, I quickly explained what was happening and asked him to clarify whether he had given anyone permission to move into the cabin. Jacob was shocked and clearly had no idea what Finn had planned. Jacob firmly told his brother that he had never given permission for this move and that they needed to leave the property immediately. Finn tried to argue that Jacob's previous conversations had implied consent, but Jacob shut that down quickly and ordered them to pack everything back up. However, the damage was already partially done. The movers had unloaded most of their belongings and were in the process of carrying furniture into the cabin. Amber had already taken Lily inside to show her what she claimed would be her new bedroom. The situation felt completely surreal and invasive. Finn refused to accept Jacob's direct order to leave, claiming that they had already paid the movers and couldn't afford to hire them again for another move. He argued that since they were already there, we should at least let them stay for a few days while they figured out their next steps. Amber emerged from the cabin carrying Lily, who was crying because she didn't understand why everyone was shouting. Amber used her daughter's distress as emotional leverage, pointing out that the chaos was traumatic for a 3-year-old and that the kindest thing would be to let them settle in peacefully. I realized that Finn and Amber had planned this confrontation carefully, knowing that once they were physically present at the cabin with all their belongings and a crying child, it would be much harder for us to force them to leave. They were counting on our discomfort with conflict to override our boundary enforcement. Instead of giving in to their manipulation, I told them they had exactly 1 hour to get all of their belongings off my property before I called the police. Finn laughed and said, I wouldn't actually call the cops on family members, but I pulled out my phone and started dialing the non-emergency number for the local sheriff's office. The threat of police involvement finally got their attention. Finn started trying to negotiate, offering to pay rent and sign a lease agreement if I would just give them a chance to prove they could be good tenants. Amber joined in, promising that they would maintain the property better than ever and that I would hardly know they were there. I refused to listen to any more of their promises and demands. I told the sheriff's dispatcher that I had trespassers on my property who were refusing to leave and requested an officer to come out and assist with their removal. The dispatcher said someone would be there within 30 minutes. While we waited for the police, Finn and Amber tried every manipulation tactic they could think of. They accused me of ruining Lily's life and destroying their family's future. They claimed that my selfishness would be remembered forever and that I was creating permanent damage within Jacob's family. Finn even suggested that my grandfather would be ashamed of how I was treating family members in need, which pushed me over the edge. I told them that my grandfather had worked hard his entire life to build something meaningful and that he would be disgusted by their sense of entitlement and their complete lack of respect for other people's property and boundaries. When the sheriff's deputy arrived, Finn and Amber tried to claim that there had been a misunderstanding and that Jacob had invited them to stay at the cabin. The officer asked to speak with Jacob directly, so I called him back and handed over my phone. Jacob clearly explained to the officer that he was my husband, that the cabin belonged entirely to me, and that he had never given anyone permission to move in. He confirmed that Finn and Amber were trespassing and needed to be removed from the property immediately. The deputy was very professional and gave Finn and Amber a choice. They could leave voluntarily with all of their belongings, or they could be arrested for trespassing and their belongings would be left on the roadside. Faced with this ultimatum, they finally agreed to pack up and leave. Loading everything back into the moving van took another 2 hours, during which Finn and Amber continued trying to guilt me into changing my mind. They acted like I was the villain in the situation and made sure Lily understood that me, Aunt Sarah, was forcing them to leave their new home. By the time they finally drove away, I was exhausted and shaken by the entire experience. The deputy stayed until they were completely gone and suggested that I consider changing the lock since they had obviously found a way to access the property without permission. That evening, Jacob drove up to the cabin to check on me and help me process what had happened. He was horrified by his brother's behavior and apologized repeatedly for not anticipating that Finn would attempt something so extreme. Jacob admitted that he had been naive about his family's intentions and that their willingness to violate my property rights had opened his eyes to their true character. He said he finally understood why I had been so firm about maintaining boundaries and that he was ashamed of himself for not supporting me more strongly from the beginning. Update 3. The aftermath of the cabin incident has been both worse and better than I expected. Jacob and I have managed to work through our marital problems, but his relationship with his family has been completely destroyed. I wish I could say I felt bad about that, but honestly, I'm relieved that we don't have to deal with their manipulation and entitlement anymore. The day after Finn and Amber were forced to leave the cabin, Carol called Jacob screaming about how I had humiliated the family by calling the police on them. She accused me of being vindictive and cruel and demanded that Jacob choose between his family and his marriage. She said that if he didn't force me to apologize and allow Finn to move into the cabin, they would disown him completely. Jacob's response surprised both Carol and me. Instead of trying to negotiate or find a middle ground like he usually did, he told his mother that her ultimatum was unacceptable and that he fully supported my decision to call the police. He said that Finn and Amber's behavior had been criminal and that they deserved whatever consequences resulted from their actions. Carol hung up on Jacob, and within hours he started receiving text messages from various extended family members expressing their disappointment in his disloyalty to his brother. Apparently, Finn and Amber had spent the evening calling everyone in the family to share their version of events, painting themselves as victims of my heartlessness. The family narrative was that Jacob and I had initially agreed to let them live at the cabin temporarily, but that I had changed my mind at the last minute out of spite and jealousy. According to their story, they had moved forward with the arrangement in good faith, only to be blindsided by my cruelty and vindictiveness. Several of Jacob's aunts and uncles called him to express their concern about his marriage and suggest that he needed to stand up to me before I completely isolated him from his family. His cousin even offered to mediate a family meeting where everyone could work out their differences and find a solution that worked for everyone. Jacob declined all offers of intervention and told his extended family that they didn't have the full story about what had happened. He explained that Finn and Amber had trespassed on my property after being explicitly told they couldn't live there and that calling the police had been the appropriate response to their criminal behavior. Most of his family members didn't want to hear Jacob's side of the story because it contradicted the narrative they had already accepted. They accused him of being brainwashed by me and suggested that his marriage was unhealthy if it required him to choose between his wife and his family. The situation got worse when Finn and Amber's relationship fell apart completely 2 weeks after the cabin incident. Apparently, the stress of being essentially homeless with a small child was too much for their engagement to survive. Finn blamed Amber for pushing him to attempt the cabin takeover, while Amber blamed Finn for promising her something he couldn't deliver. Their breakup was messy in public, with both of them posting angry messages on social media about each other's failures and character flaws. Amber took Lily and moved back in with her own parents in another state, effectively removing herself from our lives permanently. Finn moved back in with Carol and Dennis, but their living situation has been tense because he's angry and bitter about how everything turned out. According to Jacob's sister Linda, who still talks to us occasionally, Finn spends most of his time complaining about how I ruined his life and prevented him from building a stable family. Carol and Dennis have tried several times to get Jacob to meet with them so they can repair their family relationships, but Jacob has refused all their invitations. He told them that he's willing to have a relationship with them if they can acknowledge that Finn's behavior was wrong and stop trying to blame me for the consequences of his actions. So far, they haven't been able to meet that simple requirement. They continue to insist that the whole situation was just a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion and that everyone needs to forgive and forget so the family can move forward together. Jacob's refusal to pretend that nothing happened has resulted in his parents essentially cutting him off. They don't call anymore except to invite him to family events that specifically exclude me, which he automatically declines. Holiday plans have become a major source of stress because they expect him to choose between spending time with them and spending time with me. The strangest part of this whole experience has been watching Jacob transform from someone who desperately wanted to keep peace with his family into someone who's willing to set firm boundaries and stick to them. The cabin incident was apparently the wake-up call he needed to realize that his family's love was conditional on his willingness to sacrifice his marriage for their convenience. Jacob has told me several times that he's actually grateful this happened because it forced him to see his family's true priorities and manipulative patterns. He said that living with the constant pressure to choose between me and them was exhausting, and that having clear boundaries has made his life much more peaceful. As for me, I've changed the locks on the cabin and installed a security system with cameras and motion sensors. I also had a lawyer send a formal trespass warning to Finn, making it clear that any future attempts to access my property without permission will result in immediate arrest and prosecution. The cabin feels peaceful again, and Jacob and I have been able to enjoy our weekends there without the constant underlying tension that existed before. We've started hosting some of my family members and our friends there, and it's become the relaxing retreat I always wanted it to be. I know some people might think I was too harsh in my response to Finn and Amber's situation, but I don't regret standing firm on my boundaries. They had multiple opportunities to accept our decision gracefully and find alternative solutions to their housing problems. Instead, they chose to escalate the situation through manipulation, trespassing, and emotional blackmail. Jacob and I are doing well now, and our marriage is stronger than it's been in years. We've learned that we can handle major conflicts together as long as we're honest about our priorities and willing to support each other when outside pressure gets intense. The only sadness I feel about this situation is for little Lily, who got caught up in the adults' poor decisions and probably doesn't understand why she can't live in the pretty house by the water anymore. But ultimately, her welfare was her parents' responsibility, not mine. And I refuse to feel guilty for refusing to enable their sense of entitlement. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. My twin sister's boyfriend was dating me to get close to her. He had an obsession with twins and now won't leave us alone. I, 28 female, met James, 36 male, 4 months ago at my friend Lisa's birthday party. Lisa had invited a mix of people from different friend groups, and James was there with his colleague Mike, who was Lisa's boyfriend. When we first met, James seemed perfect. He was charming, intelligent, and showed genuine interest in getting to know me. Being 36, he was more mature than guys I dated before. He has a stable career as a software engineer at a reputable tech company, owns his house, and seemed to have his life together. For context, I need to explain about my twin sister, Sarah. We're identical twins, but growing up, she was always considered the more successful one. She became a nurse, graduated top of her class, and practically everyone in our family adores her. Don't get me wrong, I love my sister dearly, but our parents always made comparisons between us, which affected my self-esteem. When Sarah got straight A's, they'd ask why I got B's. When she became head cheerleader, they wondered why I preferred drama club. Even now, at family gatherings, they bring up her achievements more than mine. Despite this, Sarah and I maintained a close relationship. We tell each other everything and try to meet at least once a week for coffee. She's always been supportive of my career in marketing, even though our parents think it's less prestigious than nursing. She's genuinely a good person, which makes the situation even more complicated. The first 3 months with James were amazing. He would surprise me with lunch at work, remembered small details about things I liked, and always made time for me despite his busy schedule. He never checked out other women when we were together and always made me feel special. I started to think I'd finally found someone who saw me for me, not as Sarah's twin. Things changed when James met Sarah at our monthly family dinner. I noticed small things at first, how his eyes would linger on her a bit too long, how he seemed more animated when talking to her. I brushed it off as him trying to make a good impression on my family. Sarah brought her boyfriend Tom, who'd been dating for 2 months. Tom's a high school teacher, kind and down to earth, but James seemed dismissive of him from the start. Over the next few weeks, James started bringing up Sarah in our conversations more frequently. He'd ask about her work schedule, her hobbies, and what she was like growing up. Again, I tried to rationalize it as him showing interest in my family. But then came the comments about Tom. We were having dinner at his place last week when he suddenly said, "I don't think Tom is right for Sarah." When I asked why, he launched into this long speech about how Sarah deserves someone more ambitious, someone who could match her intelligence and drive. He said things like any man would be lucky to have someone like her and she's wasting her potential with him. The way he spoke about her, it was like he'd been thinking about this a lot. I started paying more attention after that. When we're at family gatherings, his eyes follow her around the room. He positions himself to be near her whenever possible. Last Sunday at our parents' house, Sarah was telling everyone about a difficult case at the hospital and James was completely engrossed. He asked detailed follow-up questions and complimented her dedication to her patients. When Tom mentioned wanting to take Sarah on a beach vacation, James immediately suggested several exotic locations, talking about them as if he'd already planned the perfect trip. What really set off alarm bells was his reaction to Sarah's new dress at our sister's baby shower last weekend. It was a simple blue sundress, but James couldn't take his eyes off her. Later, he told me I should get the same dress because it would look great on me too. It felt like he was trying to make me more like her. I've noticed he's always online when Sarah posts anything on social media. He likes and sometimes comments on her posts within minutes. When I checked his phone with his permission to order food delivery last night, I saw he had saved several of her photos from Facebook. Who does that with their girlfriend's sister? The worst part is that Sarah hasn't noticed anything unusual. She's friendly with James but maintains clear boundaries. Tom seems oblivious too, probably because he's secure in their relationship. I haven't told anyone about my concerns yet. My best friend Rachel would tell me to dump him immediately, but I worry I'm letting my childhood insecurities cloud my judgment. Part of me wonders if I'm seeing things that aren't there. Maybe he's just trying to be friendly with my family. But then I remember how he stares at her, how he criticizes her boyfriend, how he saves her photos, and my stomach turns. Am I crazy for thinking my boyfriend might be attracted to my twin sister? Should I confront him about this? Should I talk to Sarah first? I need objective opinions because I can't tell if I'm overreacting or if this situation is as messed up as it feels. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since my original post, and everything has fallen apart. After reading the comments suggesting I talk to James about his behavior, I decided to confront him. What I discovered was far worse than I imagined. I invited him over to my apartment last Friday, thinking a private setting would be better for this conversation. I had planned everything I wanted to say. I started by calmly explaining how his behavior around Sarah made me uncomfortable. I mentioned specific incidents, the constant staring, the comments about Tom saving her photos, and his excessive interest in her life. His reaction shocked me. Instead of trying to understand my perspective, he became defensive and angry. He accused me of being paranoid and said I was creating problems because of my obvious jealousy towards Sarah. He brought up instances from the past 4 months where I had mentioned feeling overshadowed by her, using my own insecurities against me. But then came the revelation that changed everything. In the middle of our argument, he suddenly said, "You weren't even supposed to be the one I met that night." I didn't understand at first, but as he kept talking, the truth came out. He had matched with Sarah on Tinder 6 months ago before she met Tom. They had chatted for several weeks, but Sarah stopped responding when she met Tom. James claimed he had no idea we were twins when he met me at Lisa's party, but that was a lie too. Through more questioning, I discovered that Mike, Lisa's boyfriend, had mentioned to James that his girlfriend was friends with Sarah's twin sister. James deliberately engineered the meeting at Lisa's party. He admitted he thought it was fate, giving him another chance when he realized I was Sarah's twin. The party meeting wasn't coincidental. He had asked Mike to introduce us. When I confronted him about saving Sarah's photos, his reaction was frightening. He became extremely agitated, pacing around my living room, saying I had no right to question him about what he saved on his private phone despite him giving me permission to use it. He said things like, "You should be grateful I chose you, and you're just as good as she is." The way he compared us made me feel physically ill. The argument escalated when he suggested that I was actually the lucky one in this situation. He said since Sarah was technically his first choice but wasn't available, I should be flattered that he settled for me since we look exactly alike. Those words broke something in me. I told him to leave immediately. As soon as he left, I called Sarah. She was at work but stepped out to talk when she heard how upset I was. I told her everything on Tinder, about James engineering, our meeting, about his obsession. She was horrified. She barely remembered matching with him because they had only exchanged messages for a short time before she met Tom. She felt terrible that he had used me to get close to her. Sarah came over after her shift and we decided to investigate further. We looked up his dating profile together. What we found was disturbing. His entire dating history showed a clear pattern, all petite brunettes who looked remarkably similar to us. We found at least 15 women who could have been our cousins based on appearance alone. The next day, James started his campaign to win me back. He sent dozens of messages alternating between apologizing and accusing me of overreacting. He claimed I was twisting everything and that his interest in Sarah was purely friendly. When I didn't respond, he started showing up at my workplace with flowers and gifts. It got so bad that security had to escort him out twice. My parents found out about the breakup through Sarah. Their reaction frustrated me even more. They suggested I was being too harsh and should give James another chance because he seems genuinely sorry and men like him don't come along often. My mom even said maybe I was reading too much into his friendliness towards Sarah. Only Sarah fully understands how violated and used I feel. Sarah has been amazing through all this. She immediately blocked James on all social media platforms and warned Tom about his behavior. She also helped me document everything in case his behavior escalates further. Tom was understandably angry when he learned about the situation and offered to help if James keeps showing up uninvited. I'm struggling to process everything. The past 4 months feel like a lie. Every moment, every conversation with James now has a different meaning. Was he imagining Sarah every time he looked at me? Was he comparing us constantly? The thought makes me sick. I've blocked him everywhere, but I'm afraid this isn't over yet. Update 2. It's been 2 months since my last update, and the situation has escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. Last month, Sarah discovered something deeply unsettling. After blocking James on all her main social media accounts, she started getting follow requests from accounts she didn't recognize. These accounts had generic names and stock photos as profile pictures. She ignored them at first until one of her coworkers mentioned seeing someone who looked like me lurking around the hospital parking lot where Sarah works. Sarah started investigating these suspicious accounts and found they were all created within days of her blocking James. Each account had saved every single one of her photos, including ones from private hospital events that weren't public. What really scared her was finding comments on photos of her with patients. He had somehow figured out which patients she had treated and tried to contact them, claiming he was doing a satisfaction survey about her care. The hospital administration got involved when one elderly patient's family reported receiving strange messages asking personal questions about Sarah. They had to issue him a formal warning and threaten legal action. Sarah had to explain the whole situation to her supervisors, which was humiliating for her. Tom's experience was even more frightening. He started noticing a familiar car parked outside their apartment building during odd hours. The first few times he dismissed it as coincidence. Then one night, coming home late from school, he caught James sitting in his car watching their apartment. When Tom confronted him, James claimed he was there to talk to me about getting back together. This made no sense since I've never lived in that area. Sarah moved there last year. This happened 3 more times before they called the police. They set up security cameras and documented every incident. The footage showed James following Sarah to work multiple times and sitting in his car outside their building for hours. With this evidence, Sarah and Tom were able to get a restraining order against him. The most disturbing revelation came through social media. I had posted about my experience with James as a warning to other women. A woman named Rachel messaged me saying my story sounded familiar. 2 years ago, she and her identical twin sister had a similar experience with James. He had dated Rachel for 6 months while becoming increasingly obsessed with her twin. Their situation ended when he started showing up at the twins' workplace and had to be removed by security. The professional consequences caught up with James too. His erratic behavior extended to my workplace, where he kept trying to get past security to see me. He would wait in the parking lot and follow my coworkers, asking them to pass messages to me. My company had to threaten legal action. When his employers found out about the restraining order and his behavior, they terminated him. Now, James emails me from different addresses daily, claiming I've ruined his life. He says I'm the crazy one who couldn't handle his innocent friendship with my sister. He's created elaborate stories about how Sarah led him on and I turned her against him out of jealousy. Some of his emails are angry rants, others are bizarre love letters comparing me to Sarah. Each one shows his grip on reality slipping further. What scares me most is how calculated he was from the beginning. Looking back, every move was deliberate. From engineering our first meeting to integrating himself into my family, he spent months planning and executing this sick game. How many other twin sisters has he done this to? How many more will there be? We're all taking extra safety precautions now. Sarah and Tom are looking for a new apartment, and I've temporarily moved in with friends. The police are involved, but they say they can't do much unless he violates the restraining order. All we can do is document everything and stay vigilant. Update 3. 6 months have passed since my original post. While things have improved, the aftermath of James's obsession continues to affect our lives in unexpected ways. James finally stopped trying to contact us after receiving a final warning from the police. His last attempt was particularly disturbing. He tried reaching our parents by pretending to be a distant cousin who was concerned about the family situation. Fortunately, our parents had become much more vigilant and immediately reported him. Sarah and Tom moved to a new apartment in a secure building with 24-hour surveillance. They didn't share their new address with anyone outside immediate family. Tom's school also had to implement new security measures after James was spotted in the parking lot one last time. Sarah switched to working primarily in a different wing of the hospital where visitors need special clearance. The experience changed our family dynamic significantly. My parents, who initially dismissed my concerns, now understand the severity of the situation. They've apologized repeatedly for suggesting I give James another chance. More importantly, they've stopped their lifelong habit of comparing Sarah and me. Seeing how James weaponized their comparisons made them realize the damage it had caused. Sarah and Tom postponed their wedding plans until they felt more secure. Initially, Sarah felt guilty about the whole situation, thinking her existence somehow caused this. We've had long conversations about it, and she's finally stopped blaming herself. If anything, this experience has brought us closer. We now have a deeper understanding of each other's perspectives and insecurities. Rachel, the twin who reached out about her experience with James, has become a close friend. She introduced us to a support group for people who've dealt with stalking. Through the group, we discovered 2 more sets of twins who had encounters with James in different states. We're working with a lawyer to see if there's enough evidence for a broader case against him. I'm still single and honestly prefer it that way right now. The thought of dating makes me anxious, but I'm working through it. My focus is on rebuilding my sense of security and independence. I changed jobs to a company with better security, moved to a new apartment, and adopted a large dog for company and protection. The most valuable lesson from this experience was learning to trust my instincts. Those initial uncomfortable feelings about James's behavior weren't paranoia or jealousy. They were warning signs. I'm grateful I acted on them before things got worse. While I wish none of this had happened, it taught me important lessons about self-worth and boundaries. I'm no longer the person who doubts herself when something feels